21st century, Doug Criscitello back to campus.
Well, good afternoon, and congratulations, parents, faculty, and graduates. You did it. Welcome to the family of U of R alums. This is a great day, and I'm so happy to be here to help you celebrate. You know, I was sitting where you are now, not all that many years ago, and I do occasionally reflect on the commencement speech that was given then, when the speaker encouraged graduates to make the world a better place and persuasively addressed the question, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Well, notwithstanding the current state of affairs in DC, I'll resist the urge to flip the question and ask, if you're so rich, why aren't you smart? Instead, I'll share with you three perspectives I've gained in the years since working in and around government. And many years have passed, so I have plenty of insights to offer, but I'm not going to offer them as advice. Really just reflections on my own journey. So I'm going to hit you with three things. The first thing is the need to build trust. Now, I don't think anyone sets out in their career with a singular purpose of becoming a trusted individual, but I can't think of a more important attribute. When checking references for a new hire, if I'm told the candidate is highly trusted, that's often a clincher for a job offer. But what is trust and how is it garnered? Well, as kids, we tend to think of trust as something that comes from telling the truth, playing fairly, just basically, the old do unto others. And those qualities are probably sufficient to cause us to trust a child. But for an adult, those same attributes suggest a narrower description, namely that someone is worthy of trust. To paraphrase one of my colleagues, Bob Merton, trust is earned when trustworthiness is joined with competence. Now, I consider my son Kyle, we were talking about Kyle earlier, or even my daughter Lindsay here, to be trustworthy. But I wouldn't trust either of them to perform a surgical procedure on me because they don't have the competence of a surgeon. To earn trust in the workplace, you've got to have all of the qualities that drive trustworthiness while doing your work with a high degree of competence. And keep in mind, much of your professional career, much of your professional reputation, and the trust that comes with it will be established in your early years in the workforce. So kill it early on. Those initial successes will pay dividends throughout your life. Now, as long as I'm on the issue of trust, I'd be remiss not to make a few observations about the need for trust in government. Trust levels have been trending downward for decades, really driven initially by Vietnam and Watergate, but lately they've absolutely been in free fall. And it's true that playing fast and loose with the facts has long been a hallmark of politicians. So why should we be concerned now? Well, when we can't trust our elected leaders to be authoritative sources of information on critically important topics, the world, already a dangerous place where bad things can and do happen, becomes riskier. Economists study the likelihood and impacts of highly consequential but low probability events known as tail risks. Consider a major pandemic or another financial crisis or a crippling cyber attack that shuts down entire segments of the economy. Although unlikely, such events can be catastrophic. A new form of risk that I homophonically call tail risk, T-A-L-E risk, arises when we're forced to question the veracity of statements made by our elected officials. It's taking a hold at a time when the potential severity of actual tail risk is growing. We live in such an interconnected world today, and that conveys tremendous advantages and benefits most of the time. But it also heightens the likelihood of contagion when risks materialize elsewhere. On this rapidly advancing planet, systemic risks are on the rise. And while there's no omnipotent solution to rebuild trust in government overnight, we as a society need to find new ways to build trust in government and in each other in ways that embrace science, technology, and innovation. New ingredients for TAIL risk preparedness and TALE risk avoidance. We're rapidly moving beyond the digital revolution and now find ourselves in an era of intelligence where data informs all we do. I know I'm sounding like the MIT geek up here. Modern data platforms and the intelligent machines they feed, along with democratizing forms of technology such as crowdsourcing and blockchain applications, suggest a future better able to predict and respond to both forms of tail risk. And that brings me to my second perspective, having a data-driven mindset. In the same way I didn't set out to be Mr. Truth, I also didn't intend to be a data jock. But I quickly discovered the workplace is divided into those who are comfortable working with numbers and data and those who aren't. And as any good U of R poli-sci major would do, I aligned myself with the data nerds. And it turned out to be a good decision. The opportunity to conduct data-driven evaluations of programs knows no end, and budget and finance drive everything, so comfort in using numbers and manipulating data is often an important differentiator in the professional world. And even if you manage somehow to avoid econ, math, and other quant courses here at U of R, don't dodge the continuous stream of data-related opportunities awaiting you in the workplace. On-the-job training can turn poets into prognosticators. Notwithstanding the tremendous advances made in terms of computational power and data in recent decades, it's not clear that the analytical capabilities of at least the US government have increased significantly. I was recently addressing a large conference of federal financial managers, and I posed the question, do you have stronger analytical capabilities among your staff today than you did 25 years ago? And amazingly, I got an answer that it was unclear that that those strengths had improved. Now contrast that with industries that are driven by bottom line considerations. You know, Wall Street and private equity firms are full of quant jocks, you know, along with other types of business, anything high tech, healthcare, retail, to sports, right? Think Moneyball. The need to analyze data has never been more ubiquitous or relevant. And while increasingly intelligent bots may fill some of that need, humans have to ask the right questions and understand the meaning of results. The next wave isn't artificial intelligence, it's extended human intelligence. Now, government, never known as the early adopter of anything, will get there in time. We're already seeing progress, particularly at the local levels of government. And going forward, we're going to be basing public policy decisions increasingly on data, complemented with human judgment, informed judgment, as the use of gut instincts just becomes an absolutely discarded past practice. For probably the first time in the human experience, the nature of work has changed so dramatically in just a single generation that we can no longer replicate past successes and assume they'll continue to work. Now, a good conversation icebreaker these days, if you meet anyone over 30, right, is to ask whether their job has changed much in the last 5 to 10 years. You really will be amazed at the responses you get. So that moves me to my final perspective, being a constant citizen. I was so fortunate to have attended the U of R at a time when some of the truly great political scientists of the 20th century were here. people like Bill Riker, who was mentioned earlier, and Ted Bloom and Dick Fenno, to name a few of the most prominent. By the way, I still recall a 2-word final exam offered by Riker in a positive political theory class, which just said, it was a blank piece of paper, it just said, prove error. And for me, the impossibility of that S was more than just a theorem. I figured there'd be like 5 people that would get it. But it was another professor of mine who provided an insight that's always stuck with me. At the beginning of one of the courses he taught, and I think he frequently said this, Professor Bruce Jacobs pointed out that we could use the information we were about to learn either to improve government or to just be an informed citizen. And, you know, through my career, I've come to realize that Bruce was so right, and that maybe us poli-sci types could even use our knowledge to try to do both. Now, I've had a number of neat jobs through my career. I guess I was an early adopter of the gig economy, at least for a kid from upstate New York, from Binghamton. You know, I've worked at the White House on Capitol Hill. I've worked on Wall Street. But my first job after graduation was with the New York City Department of Sanitation at the Fresh Hills landfill in Staten Island during a particularly hot summer. And I got to tell you, I am still trying to wash the funk of that job off of me, but I was actually doing some really interesting work trying to improve the management of the site, which is the disposal location for so much garbage that it's now the highest point on the U.S. Eastern Seaboard. And it was a fascinating bunch of characters that worked at sanitation. You know, imagine the cast of Parks and Rec, and instead of being focused on parks, they're focused on garbage. That was pretty much this crew. They were very present, and never assuming it was someone else's job to resolve the types of issues encountered in everyday big city life. Things like picking up trash, a newspaper found on a subway car, or helping out a homeless person on a cold night, or telling tourists where to go, literally, not metaphorically. They just constantly be on the lookout for their fellow citizens and would readily do whatever they could to make the city a better place. Well, I left the city after a few years and moved to DC for a federal job, but I returned a decade later to set up the New York City Independent Budget Office to serve as a check on the mayor. And I gotta tell you, the recent congressional pursuit of the president's tax returns has reminded me of my days at IBO. And notwithstanding a law guaranteeing me access to city data and systems, I was forced to sue a certain mayor, who seems to be on TV frequently these days, to get him to comply. Now, I suppose a chief executive can engage the judicial branch as a standard part of governing, but it'd be a whole lot cooler if that person simply executed faithfully the laws of the land. Now, shifting to my days in the US government, I was fortunate to work at places where dedication and do the right thing ethic of my colleagues rubbed off on me. Hard work and commitment really are highly contagious. My focus was often placed on building citizen trust in government. And as a federal CFO, I viewed myself as being a taxpayer advocate. It's amazing how some government officials seem to forget that they're spending taxpayer dollars. When I was at HUD as their CFO, I was actually pushing a government-wide initiative trying to get the following clause added to the beginning of every agency mission statement. I wanted them to start with, as constant stewards of taxpayer dollars, comma, we seek to ... You know, I'd really like to see that one adopted. I didn't pull it off, but. So I realize I've focused most of my remarks today on governments here in the US, but working at MIT has given me the opportunity to work from students from around the world. I've got to know so many smart and energetic students who plan to return to their countries and work in public service. It's really been an uplifting experience that makes me optimistic for our global future. And I'm sure many of the international students here at the U of R share that spirit. It doesn't have to be a lifelong commitment, but don't be afraid to do some time in the public sector. The revolving door between the public and private sectors can be a good thing if you remain a constant citizen. You know, sure, the pay tends to be lower, but that barely registers on the sacrifice scale when you consider, you know, folks like my dad who operated a howitzer as an 18-year-old in the South Pacific during World War II. And maybe even run for something at some point. I'm fond of that old saying that the desire to hold elective office should be a disqualifying factor, but maybe if more of us were willing to run, it wouldn't be as true. So that's my take. Looking back, I've somehow managed to build trust, bring a data-driven mindset, and act as a constant citizen. And I realized that I promised not to offer advice, and I did so anyway, but let me leave you with a particularly apt lyric from life's true spiritual advisors, the Grateful Dead, a band whose show at the U of R Palestra nearly 50 years ago still echoes today. Fare thee well now, let your life proceed by its own design. Nothing to tell now, let the words be yours, I'm done with mine. Congratulations.